Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Kingdom of Heaven, starring Orlando Bloom, Eva Green, Jeremy Irons, David Thewlis, Brendan Gleeson, Martin Sokas, and Liam Neeson, directed by Ridley Scott. Now, before I get into this, I had to sit through this movie like 3 to 5 times for this review. Like on my second viewing, I watched the Roadshow director's cut, the one that Ridley Scott likes the most. But first I saw the theatrical cut, and that was boring. And what made it worse was this director's cut. Let's get into the director's cut, and you'll see why. We start the first minute and a half with an overture as we get started with the movie at a remote village in France in the year 1184. Godfrey de Ilbelin, something like that, played by Liam Neeson, is looking for his son Balain, played by Orlando Bloom, as he's a blacksmith, along with his half-brother Priest, played by Michael Sheen, who is a head of a church with his family, as Priest's family takes him in. And the cinematography looks great in this movie, but am I understanding what the hell is going on? No. As he envisions his pregnant wife, and by he I mean Balin, having a baby, and when we get back to the real world, snow falls down to the ground, and I like the shots of that, as that is a professionally shot. This is a professionally shot movie. Priest torments Balin as he can't fight back against his half brother, and we move on to the next day, and he puts together a sword until Godfrey does find him and stay at his workshop. And for now, and I don't get the relationship with the characters on my first viewing. And are they well developed? Absolutely not, because I just don't like the characters, nor do I care. While Godfrey approaches Balin and says he's from Jerusalem and he knew his mother, as he tells him he's his father, and I thought, yeah, no shit. While he asks Balin to forgive him, but he doesn't, as he says his place is with the blacksmith, and he advises if he wants anything from him, he should talk now. But unfortunately, Balin says he wants nothing from him, and Godfrey lives. And I thought, what the hell is this movie supposed to be? As I can't follow this movie, as it makes no sense at times. Priest once again torments Balin by talking about his wife, who's dead, and Balin kills Priest because he ordered Balin's wife to be beheaded. Now, first of all, is this supposed to be a true story? Because I'm not believing any of this crap. As he just told him, and we never meet the wife, so that didn't matter to me. And Balin leaves the village to join Godfrey to go to Jerusalem after he kills his brother Priest, while they stop for the day. And one guy pisses on the river where they get drinking water from, which is so unnecessary in so many different goddamn levels. While Godfrey teaches Balin how to fight in a war with a sword, as well as Godfrey's men, until they're interrupted by Godfrey's nephew, who wants to bring back Balin for his crimes against Priest, and gets in a crossbow fight. And this action scene reminded me of the opening war scene of Gladiator, which I'll get to before part 2 comes out. But Gladiator did it so much better than this did. I mean, come on. Particularly the slow motion shots, and eventually Godfrey and his men got hit badly. And this scene is reminding me of the first 10 minutes of Gangs of New York, where Liam Neeson gets killed by Bill the Butcher, aka Daniel Day-Lewis's character, in that movie. And Scorsese does a much better job with the death of Liam Neeson than director Ridley Scott, or hell, even George Lucas. I mean, come on. He killed him in The Phantom Menace. That's stupid. We get to Messina, where Godfrey heals and introduces his brothers to his son Balin, and to the ruler of Messina, as he lies in a bed at a hospital of some kind, while Balin visits him and is asked by Godfrey to be knighted and serve the king of Jerusalem and protect the helpless. And Messina looks drop dead gorgeous, and the ruler doesn't like Balin, as when he eats lunch, it shows while later that night Godfrey knights Bolton while slapping his face, which is something that'll come back at some point in the end of the film, as he dies. And will I miss Liam Neeson in this movie? Well, yes, but at the same time, he had to film Batman Begins after this, and that's why he didn't show up for Revenge of the Sith. Thank God for that. the same year. And no, because I just don't care for the characters. We get to a dark, stormy night at sea, and a ship is flipped upside down, and they crash on a beach of some kind while Balin saves a horse from the sand, and Balin goes to the middle of the desert and eventually gets some of water and a horse that belongs to someone else who he fights and asks to take him to Jerusalem as they arrive and to there. And at the end of the day, to be brutally honest, I don't find Orlando Bloom as an epic action star because he doesn't feel tough in this movie, as I don't buy him in this movie as he was a side character in both The Lord of the Rings and Pirates of the Caribbean. The next day, Balin buries his wife's necklace he stole from a priest in the beginning of the movie, who stole it from his wife, and goes into town and picks up a sword, and he's taken to and meets King Baldwin the Fourth, played by Edward Norton. What the fuck are you doing in this movie? As well as the Marshal of Jerusalem, Tiberius, played by Jeremy Irons, the king's sister, Princess Sibylla, played by Eva Green before she was ever the Bond girl in Casino Royale, who seems to take a liking to Balin while married to her husband Guy de Lusignan, I don't know if I'm saying that right, played by Martin Sokas, who supports anti-Muslim activities and brutal factions like the Knights Templar, and Reynold of Chatillon, played by Brendan Gleeson. And despite I like their presences, but at the same time, unfortunately, I just don't care for them in this movie, as I'm kind of bored so far, as nothing too epic is happening, as this is supposed to be an epic movie, but so far it's not in my mind, which is really sad. Sibylla enters the room while Balin being there while they have supper, and the costume designing in this is magnificent, sure, as Balin and Sibylla are slowly falling in love with, and the performances by Orlando Bloom and Eva Green are not great, as I don't feel their chemistry between the two, while Balin and King Baldwin play chess with one another and discussing what's going to happen to Jerusalem. And what's with Edward Norton's accent, as it doesn't sound believable to me. And we move on to the next day with knights going to an enemy camp after enemy camp. And I like how this movie is shot, but I'm just going to say it, I didn't enjoy myself watching the movie because it took me a few sittings, maybe more than that, to finish the extended cut on the second viewing. As director Ridley Scott prefers the director's cut, but it's just unfortunately not my favorite, and neither is that theatrical cut. This isn't really one of his best works, in my opinion. Sibylla takes off to another location as she tells Brian, and he goes in a room to sit with her and for a wash, and they go outside, as I believe it was the next morning, as Balin makes a toy sailboat to set sail, and Sibylla gets paintings on her body, and what the hell is that all about? And at this point, I'm bored with the movie, as nothing much is happening, but wait till I get to Exodus, and I'll get there when I get there. Some knights, led by Reynold, go after some other knights and have a bloody war of some kind, and it is graphic for damn sure, as Balin and Sibylla wake up next to each other because they slept together and have sexual intercourse, and of some kind, I should say. And we move on to Tiberius and King Baldwin having a meeting with the Knights of Baldwin, and will lead to assemble the army, and they prepare for war at Carrick Castle and fight with some other knights. And the slow motion scenes has to stop because we're leading to a battle that might be brutal, but instead we get all the slow motion shit going on in the movie. It's bothering me. The battle begins rather bloody on not just humans, but on horses, as well as Balin is in it, and Sibylla is watching from a distance, and somehow Balin is awakened by a knight, and I can't understand what the fuck's going on at this point. And we get the leader of the enemy fighters, I think it's a Muslim meeting with King Baldwin, and wishing a full recovery, and Baldwin gets back to his castle, and Reynold is arrested after kissing Baldwin's ring on his hand, begging for his life. And this was an unexpected arrest, as I normally like Brendan Gleeson in other movies, but not here. And we get a 3-minute intermission. We get back to the enemy knight's ruler, and they talk about what they made a promise to Jerusalem. I don't quite fully understand what's going on in that scene, and the score of walking in a bedroom in a castle was pretty damn obnoxious. During that moment of the film, as we get a priest and his son, he'll confess to God when he sees him, and the next scene, Guy is having sexual affairs while Sabia is in love with Balin, and she says her brother is dying, and by her brother I mean King Baldwin. And we move on to the next day. Guy approaches Sabia about how much they should be married to one another, or else leave him after. And after Gladiator, I can't believe Ridley Scott made a ripoff of a movie he did 5 years ago. Meanwhile, even though I'll get there before I get to the sequel. Meanwhile, Balin chats with King Baldwin and Tiberius, as Balin is hated by the men, and he approaches Sabia, and she comes off rather feisty to him, as well as he visits Reynold in his jail cell, and King Baldwin asks Tiberius to take Sabia to see her brother, and she comes in the room and dies, and Guy has a wife with Sabia. And do I care about any of this? Not whatsoever. And this movie is soured in my mouth at this point, but not as completely sour as Exodus. And at this point, I'm not enjoying watching the movie at all, as it's boring, predictable, and obnoxious and unnecessary. King Baldwin's funeral happens as his son Jerusalem is now king, as Balin gets a message from the enemy, the Muslims, let's say, that war is coming for them, while Sabia is helping Jerusalem to become a king, as she's getting too stressed out, while Tiberius tells her Jerusalem has to wear a mask as king, and she would rather go to hell than see her son under a mask, and tells Jerusalem the story of his father as well as herself, while Balin sees a couple of knights and attacks them, and kills one and fights the second one and stabs him in the fucking head, as a priest gets Reynold out of jail to find and kill Balin. And I'm not following any of this movie, as it's becoming a mess that's falling apart, and it's just bloated. Jerusalem's life is threatened by a sultan of Muslim is beheaded and killed and again with the fucking slow motion. It makes no sense. It's confusing. As Balin comes back and fights a war for Jerusalem, and Tiberius stands with Balin, and they fight another war after hearing the boy is dead because of Sabia. And is that what that was she was doing to him a few minutes ago? Because this movie, like I said, is absolutely fucking bloated. While Balin is told by Sabia to save her home, and he attends to, and the war continues to be fought, and Reynold is killed in this movie, is absolutely fucking bloated, too long, and boring. Even the director's cut, Ridley Scott, is the version he prefers over the theatrical cut by either way. Too bloated, too long, and too boring. The knights, as well as Balin and Tiberius, go to his war zone where dead bodies are lying at, and when they approach the war zone is a great shot, and Tiberius says he no longer fights for Jerusalem, as their king is now corrupt, while Balin continues to fight for it, as he makes a speech to the knights, as he talks to some knights and tells them to be brave and slaps one of them, like was brought up in the beginning of the movie, and to become a knight, which is questionable, as the priests questions Balin's judgment, and I would too, and they prepare for battle. And honestly, I can't understand this movie at all, as I don't give a shit about it at this point. I'm too close to turning the shit off, but I have 35 to 40 minutes of movie left, so I'll suck it up and not pull off another Screamers. The endless battle begins with fire bows and blowing up the castle, while Sabia watches as the parts of the castle is on fire, and we get to during the day, and they're still fighting, as I digged it in The Lord of the Rings, The Return to the King, but not in this movie, as this battle felt endless, and at the same time, a pile of garbage, as they're firing cannons versus bows, and they pour oil and put it on fire, and who the fuck is battling who? Oh, Muslim versus Jerusalem, as I can't tell. Yeah, they're Muslims. The movie doesn't make it clear to me, like in Gladiator and the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as Sabia cuts her hair while the fight continues, and I guess it makes sense for epic reasons, but come on, this isn't epic. as this could be one of Ridley Scott's worst movies, as I have yet to cover the worst one, the very worst one, I'll say at best. Balin gets in the fight and does some killing, and they break down some ways for from the Muslims to get inside while Sabia has a new haircut, and Balin walks by her. She doesn't want to see him, and Balin burns some dead bodies to give the enemy the idea, Jesus Christ, Muslims, the idea that they won't give up their castle, and neither will their enemy, the Muslims, as the next day comes and the Muslims still fire off the walls, and the castle, and the Muslims does break the wall, and they fight and kill every single Muslim that they can, and then nighttime comes, and everyone is either resting or dead or seriously, stop the goddamn slow motion bullshit, okay, Ridley? We fucking get it. It's obnoxious. You can do slow motion like fucking Zack Snyder can. It gets too old, it's irritating to death. While I'm waiting for this movie to please end, Balin decides to surrender himself as well as Jerusalem after a chat with the Sultan of Muslim. And I thought, what the fuck took him so goddamn long? That ends the war. I mean, Jesus Christ, shouldn't Balin have done that instead of fighting with the enemy the Muslims, while Balin tells Sabia to surrender her title as the Queen of Jerusalem? But she doesn't want to, as Balin and Guy, I'm guessing, is who that is fighting with him after surrendering. And also, what the fuck was all that about? Was that all about? As he chooses to not kill Guy and tells him to rise at night, as I didn't care, as I was almost checking out of this movie as it drags on both the theatrical and the director's cut. Well, Balin gets a not very good horse and rides off as Jerusalem falls under the rule of the Muslims. That I'm believing while Balin sees Sabia walking on her own, and he offers her a ride, and she's still pissed at him, as the Jerusalem people find a new place to live in, some come back as could be blacksmiths, and the King of England tries to offer Balin a place in England, but he declines, as Sabia seems to forgive Balin and ride together, as I just don't care. And at the end of the day, the climax doesn't save the movie my rating, which is something I'm about to get to. I'll give this movie a 2.5 out of 10. This is professionally shot, as the cinematography looks great in this movie, but I don't get the relationships between the characters, as well as they're not well developed, and at the end of the day, I just don't like any of them, nor do I care, as I don't care for any of these characters, and I don't find Orlando Bloom as an epic action star, as he was a side character in both Lord of the Rings and Pirates of the Caribbean. And I can't follow this plot because it's not Gladiator good, as this movie kind of bored me, as this is a boring for an epic film, as nothing is happening, and it's unfortunately doesn't feel epic in my mind, which is really sad. And the costume designing is good for sure, but the chemistry between Orlando Bloom and Eva Green is not this movie's strongest suit, in my opinion. Ed Norton's accent comes off rather unbelievable and in a bad way, and despite director Ridley Scott says he prefers the director's cut, it took me 3 sittings to finish, maybe more than that, to finish the extended cut, and either way, I didn't care for this movie, so there's no reason to recommend this to anyone, so I had to give this a non-recommendation, a solid non-recommendation for that matter, because I was bored from start to finish, but one of his later movies felt like a drag to get there, and I'll get there when I get there, but as for this movie, it's completely bloated, it's too fucking long, and it's too boring. Unnecessary. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time I will be back with a good year. Hope this is a better one, because I haven't finished that one myself. And until then, thank you and good night.